Welcome, everyone. I'm Joe Constan, the College of Science and Engineering's Associate Dean for Research, and I'm your MC for this event. Our next distinguished professor is Elad Tadmor. Elad Tadmor is Professor of Aerospace Engineering and Mechanics at the University of Minnesota. He received his Bachelor of Science and Master of Science in Mechanical Engineering from the Technion Israel Institute of Technology in 1987 and 91, and his PhD from Brown University in the US in 1996. He pioneered computer simulation methods and theories that span multiple length and time scales to predict the behavior of materials and nano devices, including 2D materials, from their atomic structure. He's published over 70 papers in the area and 2 graduate level textbooks. Professor Tadmor is the director of the NSF Open Knowledge Base of Interatomic Models, OpenKIM, which is a web-based cyber infrastructure tasked with developing standards and improving the reliability of atomistic simulations. He also serves on the editorial board of the Journal of Elasticity. Please join me in welcoming Professor Elad Tadmor and take it away.
All right, thank you very much. So you can tell from the title of my talk that this topic is not directly related to the research that Joe just mentioned. It's driven by a sense of concern that many of us share, I think, about the quality of discourse in our democracy. And what I'll tell you about in this talk is what we're trying to do about that at the University of Minnesota by combining engineering together with social science, law, and media in a project called Science Court. So to start off, we should examine the basic premise of this, which is that the US democracy is in trouble. And we ask ourselves, is there evidence to bear this out? So we can look at this in different ways. We can start by looking at polling data. And so what you're seeing here is a response to a poll from 2016 where people were asked whether they felt that it was necessary to live in a country that was governed democratically. And what's plotted is the percent of people that said that it was essential as a function or versus the year that they were born. So people born in the 1930s, over 70% felt that it was essential to live in a democracy. But this goes down with the age of the responder, so that people who responded in the 1980s, who are about 30 in their 30s right now, only 30% feel that it's essential to live in a democracy. Another thing we can look at is trust in institutions. And so, and in particular, the government. And so this poll has been carried out since the late 1950s, 1960s, and people were asked how much they trust government in Washington. And so in the 1960s, about 70% of people said that they trusted government always or most of the time. This actually went up to almost 80%, but then it began to decrease precipitously with the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And so this decline has been essentially going down monotonically over time, with occasional blips of optimism during the Reagan years and then again during the Clinton years. But basically it's saturated at a rock bottom level of distrust. Another approach to looking at this question of the health of the US democracy is to try to objectively measure the quality of a democracy. And so this was taken on by the Economist Unit, which is the research arm of the Economist magazine, the Intelligence Unit, which is the research arm of the Economist magazine. And they put together a measure which gives each country a score from 0 to 10, rating their government, where 0 is a sort of the worst dictatorship and 10 is a perfect democracy. When this measure was introduced in 2006, the US scored 8.2, which puts it within the range of what this measure considers a full democracy, 8 and above. But we've been going downhill ever since then, and somewhere between 2014 and 2016, we crossed the barrier into what is now considered a flawed democracy by this measure. The reasons that are laid out in this report for this drop are exactly related to the loss of trust in institutions that I mentioned in the figure above. And then finally, we can look at polarization in our political system. So this graph shows the polarization in the House and the Senate And basically, the higher the score, the more polarized the institution is. And it's a measure of the amount of collaboration between legislators coming from different parties and then the amount of time they vote across party lines. And so what we see is that in the 2016, late 2020s here, or late 2019s here, the House and the Senate were more polarized than they've ever been since this measure was applied, even more so than here at the beginning in the early or the mid 1800s, right after the Civil War. You can see similar loss of trust in many other measures of US life, from society to business, religion. Wherever you look, except for the military, there's been a loss of trust in institutions. Now, parallel to this loss of trust, there's also a distrust of basic facts. And in a recent study by Rand Corporation, they identified 4 related trends that together they refer to as truth decay in our society. So the first one is an increasing disagreement about basic facts, from anything from vaccines to GMO crops to climate change to COVID. People can't agree on facts. There is a blurring of the line between opinion and fact. So for example, interpretive journalism is a new form of journalism that mixes facts and opinion in a way that's not clear what's what. This is closely related to the rising influence of opinion and personal experience through social media, blogs, and so on. And then finally, there's a declining trust in the sources of factual information that people used to believe in. Distrust in institutions, there's deliberate interference by foreign entities, and there's technological tricks where you can basically make anything you want to look like anything else. So the question is, what can we do about this? And one thing we can't do is just wait for this to pass. As you saw earlier, these are 50+ year trends, and it's going to take as long for them to reverse naturally. Another thing we can't do is we can't fix this quickly. Unfortunately or sadly, polarization and distrust are deeply entrenched in our culture now, and they're amplified by multiple factors that coexist with them. What we need then to do is we need to figure out how we can operate in this new normal. How can we get people to make good decisions based on facts in what is essentially a hostile environment? And so we approach this in this project from an engineering perspective. We have a problem. We have loss of trust and increasing polarization, which amplify basic limitations in the way humans reason, and that leads to an inability for a democratic society to work together to make decisions. And so our approach is to try and engineer a system for group decision-making that has the following characteristics. We want it to be based on current understanding of how humans reason and make decisions. We want to allow people with diverse views to make rational, fact-based decisions in this environment. We want to be able to impact society beyond the people that are participating in the process. And we want to have a mechanism by which this approach spreads throughout society. So our solution to this is Science Court. And Science Court is an adaptation of the US jury system, but instead of trying to determine the guilt or innocence of a defendant, we're trying to adapt this system for effective decision-making. This is implemented as a course in the University Honors Program, and it was developed with strong support from the College of Science and Engineering. The way it works is that students pick an issue, a controversial issue. They then spend a semester researching the facts. They conduct a jury trial where they present the information that they've learned as a case in front of a jury of volunteers. And all of this is reported to the public at large to engage as many people as possible. The course was developed and is co-taught by an interdisciplinary team, which includes engineering, social psychology, law, media, and communication. So let me walk through, to make this less abstract, let me kind of walk through how this works in practice. So at the start of the semester, we have to pick a case that we're going to study. And we have well-defined criteria for what makes a good science court case. It has to be complex, it has to be controversial, and so on. The students are then divided into pairs, one liberal arts and one science major. And these pair of students work together to come up with an idea for the class to study. We give them a pool of possible suggestions, but they're free to go ahead and come up with their own ideas. Each pair then pitches the case to the rest of the class. We identify the most popular pitches of that group, and then we investigate them in more depth for some time. And then from those, we pick the final case that we end up spending the semester on. For example, in 2018, we picked a case called one-to-one tech that I'll explain in a second. And so the way that a case works, a science course case is set up, is we identify some problem or issue in society, and we propose a thesis, some way of solving it. So for example, for one-to-one tech, the problem can be phrased as that effective use of technology, and specifically electronic devices, is becoming an increasingly essential skill that all students should be learning in school in preparation for participating in the modern world and workforce. And so the thesis is, or a possible thesis is, that Minnesota should implement a one-to-one tech program in K-12 schools. Now, what one-to-one tech means is that students coming in at kindergarten would receive a tablet or a laptop that they would follow them throughout their educational career from kindergarten to high school, and would be an integral part of their learning experience. And so we then go to research this issue, and we start by dividing the students into 3 teams: a science team, a legal team, and a media team, each of which has different responsibilities. So the first step is to research the facts, and that's what the science team is responsible for. And so we start by identifying the domains that impact the case. Every complex case is going to be affected by multiple domains of information. In one-to-one tech, for example, education, health and psychology, economics, policy, equity, justice, and so on. Then under each of these domains, we formulate questions that we would like to know the answer to, where the answers affect the decision that we're going to make. And so, for example, under education, we might have, how do one-to-one programs affect standardized test scores? What can laptops do to promote learning? Under health and psychology, does a one-to-one program increase sedentary behavior? Does increased screen time lead to mental health problems? And there are similar questions under economics and policy and so on. The students then investigate these questions. They go to the scientific literature, they look for journal articles, meta-analyses, reliable sources of data to answer these questions as best as they can. And this is an iterative process. So as they investigate questions, other questions come up, perhaps even complete domains that we hadn't considered initially that are important. In this process, each science team student becomes an expert in a particular domain or a subdomain that they have researched throughout the semester. We call them domain reporters because, like good investigative reporters, they dive into this area and they learn as much as they can about it and then explain it to the rest of the world. Now, in parallel to this, the legal team students are preparing for a trial. But this is not a standard trial like you may be familiar from, because we've modified many aspects of it to make it more effective for our decision-making process. And so, for example, we're not simply arguing yes and no on whatever our thesis is, because experience has shown us that it's very easy for one side to poke holes in the case that the other side is making, or to talk past each other. Instead, what we do is we divide the legal team into two subgroups, a pro team and a con team. And each team is responsible for coming up with a complete proposal that is more on the pro side, we call this the pro-ish proposal, or more of the con side of the thesis. So for example, in the one-to-one tech example, the pro-ish proposal might be that Minnesota should adopt a phased approach heading towards a full one-to-one tech program in all schools. Whereas the con-ish proposal is that support for technology, there should be support for technology teaching, but it should be based on evidence and school need. So a more targeted approach rather than this sort of general plan that one-to-one suggests. Now, as they're working on their cases for this, at some point we have what we call a pretrial hearing, which is where the pro and the con teams have an opportunity to argue that certain facts should be inadmissible for the trial. This is held in front of a judge with an expert witness on scientific evaluation, and decisions are made. And we come out of that process with a common set of facts. So you can't play a game where one side is arguing for one set of facts and the other side is arguing from a different set of facts. Rather, they have to make their argument for their case based on this set of facts that we all agree on. At the trial, evidence is presented by the domain reporters, those science team students who have become experts in particular areas. They are presenting a neutral view of the facts. And so unlike regular trials where you have expert witnesses that are hired guns for the prosecution or the defense, here the information is presented by neutral agents that are just presenting the information. And then finally, we redesigned the jury itself. And so we strive to have a heterogeneous jury, a jury that has a mix of views and backgrounds and opinions, because research shows that diverse groups of people like that tend to come to better collaborative decisions. The jury is empowered, so they can ask questions, they can take notes during the trial. Their deliberation is facilitated by an expert in communications to prevent deadlock. And the jury also, in addition to choosing between these pro-ish and con-ish proposals, has the option of offering a third way if they see a compromise that's been missed. And I should say that in the trial that we did in 2019 on one-to-one tech, the jury actually voted 10-3 against one-to-one tech, but they proposed a third way, a compromise option. And then finally, the media team is responsible for getting the word out. And in many ways, this is a critical component of the entire science court idea, because we don't want just the jury and the students to get something out of this process. We want as many people out in the public as possible. And so the media team divides into a programming and a communications department. And the programming department is putting together media content. They write news stories that go on the website and on our blog. They put together a podcast with episodes along the semester. There are video explainer pieces that either explain basic concepts that are relevant to the case or interesting research. This is shared both with the public and also used by the legal teams to help educate the jury during the trial. There's a documentary at the end wrapping the whole thing up or giving the whole view of the entire semester. And all of this information is spread as widely as possible to the public through the communications department, through social media, and by interfacing with existing media organizations, both at the university and outside, to get people to cover this and listen to what we're doing. And I just want to wrap up by explaining why this is at the U. When I started thinking about this originally several years ago, my thinking was that this should be something done outside of the university, perhaps as an ungovernmental organization type of an effort. But I've since then become convinced that the university is the ideal place for a project like this. And there are several reasons. First of all, Science Court provides a natural conduit, a perfect conduit for transferring knowledge from within the university to society on issues that are of interest to society. The students who take part in this course invest a great deal of effort to take complicated concepts and break them down and present them in a way that lay people can understand, the jury and the public at large. A second thing is that this is run by students. The students are the ones that pick the case. The students are the ones that research it. They're the ones that argue it in front of the jury. And so it's nonpartisan, it's non-threatening. It's a genuine attempt by people to understand complicated issues. And so we're hoping that that maybe be able to reach people that have become suspicious of sources of authority or of expertise. And then finally, academia provides a perfect mechanism for spreading this across the country. Our plan here is to run this for several years until we have a good working model, package it up, and make it available to other universities to pick up in their own programs. And so that other universities can run their own science courts and in that way spread it across the country. So as you can see, this is very much a public-minded project. We hope that those of you that are listening to this will participate in this. Our next case will be in spring 2021, so just in a couple of months. You can help us select our case. We'll be having an event soon to do that. You can follow the preparations and the trial throughout the semester. And if you like, you can participate in the jury. So I invite you to go to our website or to sign up for our mailing list to be kept up to date on our events. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Tadmor, and thank you for showing us how important it is for our scientists and engineers to engage themselves in educating the public and making us all more literate consumers of scientific information. And, I'm going to ask a question that came in from an anonymous attendee. Is the reduced trust in institutions and government that you talked about, is that perhaps due to access to better information? As people have the internet and Google, did they just learn that the trust that they used to have was perhaps misplaced?
Yes, so lots of people have been studying what this trend is about, this reduced trust trend. And that's one of the reasons. I'm not sure I would say internet, just internet, but the motion or the movement towards transparency that we've set out as a value. As organizations become more transparent, you see a lot of things behind the scenes that maybe are not that nice. And so that affects trust for sure. And that's distributed through the internet. So I agree with that. But that's only one out of 5 or 6 different reasons that have all been driving this. So there are objective reasons. Remember, I told you that the trust began to decline with the assassination of JFK. That was the starting point. And then if you follow the trend line, that graph that I showed you, you can identify blips along the way of further loss of trust. Corruption, things like Watergate, wars that didn't end up so well. There are a variety of reasons that people lost trust that were objective reasons. Then there are other factors that are sort of its unintended consequences. So for example, rising standard of living that people have been experiencing has led people to be more independent in their thinking. So they're less likely to simply accept, to trust without evidence. Globalization, the fact that we share so many ideas from so many places has exposes us to many different ways of thinking and many different ideas, which again goes against just trusting organizations. Reduced socialization is another reason. People spend less time together. There are less members of a community. That also leads to, when you're part of a community, you're sort of used to trusting. And when you're not, there's less of that. And so, and then the internet itself, but in a more negative way than maybe you were suggesting, the question was suggesting, which is that it leads to echo chambers. It leads to people talking to other people who believe like them. It leads to conspiracy theories. And so all of those things together have, over a very long period of time, broken down trust in our society, I would say.
Thank you.